Each week over the course of the summer, we are going to look at the life of a different saint. We're going to see what lessons we can learn from them and what we can apply to our lives through the context of the gospel. We are calling this series the Summer of Saints. You'll hear about some saints who are close to our hearts, like St. Anselm or St. Bridget or Mary, Our Lady of Fatima, and maybe some who are less familiar to you. Along with the saints, we are citizens of heaven. But unlike the saints, we are still walking along our path to get there. Pope Francis said that the saints are not superhuman. Rather, they are people who loved God in their hearts and who shared this joy with others. The saints both inspire us by their example, and we can pray to them for their intercession. The most important purpose of our church is to help folks take the next step on their discipleship path. Their next step in following Jesus even closer. It's a path that begins here and now, but it's a path that leads to heaven. So, it doesn't matter if you're 2 or 92. It doesn't matter if you're married, single, or divorced. It doesn't matter if you're here because you want to be here, or you are here because someone dragged you along. It doesn't matter if you're here for the first time or here for the first time in a long time. Wherever you're from, wherever you are now, whatever's in your background, whatever is in your heart, you have a next step to take on your discipleship path. And if you take it, you can be sure that you're on the path to a better life in Jesus Christ. Because Jesus says in St. John's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 10, he said, "I came that they might have life, that you might have life, and have it to the full." The saints believe these words. And you and I can follow their example by simply taking our next step. The saint we're focusing on today is probably less familiar to most of us, but she was born only about 3 hours west of here. Among other things, she's the patron saint of ecology, the loss of parents, and those ridiculed for their piety. She was the first Native American to be canonized a saint. Her name is Kateri. Her path was difficult from an early age. She was orphaned as a young child when her parents died during outbreaks of smallpox. In fact, that disease left her partially blind and her face disfigured. As a teenager, she witnessed the proclamation of the gospel by visiting Jesuits. And she was moved by the tender and gentle love of God. In today's gospel, Jesus gives us the parable of the sower. It illustrates that the path of faith requires both attention and intention. Jesus began. A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. The sower is God. The seeds are his word. Starting out, the path of faith can be shaky and uncertain. Then Jesus continued. Some seed fell on rocky ground where it had little soil. Without roots, the seedlings wither. But God does not give up on us, because Jesus said next, some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. The question for us is, what distractions, riches, pleasures are distracting us from having a mature faith? Like us, St. Kateri encountered many rocks and many thorns. While her faith was a source of strength, it cast her as a target of hostility and rejection by the pagan members of her tribe. Kateri chose to consecrate her life to Jesus Christ and to forego the tribal custom of an arranged marriage. And as a result, she was beaten, neglected, starved, and mocked. But never did she compromise her beliefs. Jesus ended today's parable by saying, some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit 100 or 60 or 30-fold. The seed of faith which was sown in Kateri's soul blossomed and produced much fruit. Kateri was noted for her deep contemplation, her prayer, her self-sacrifice, and the devotion she showed in tending to the sick and the aging. And that's why today Kateri is hailed as the lily of the Mohawks. When we hear the story of Kateri, we must ask ourselves, what can we learn from her for our own spiritual growth? One thing we can learn is that Kateri did not wait until the circumstances were perfect before she decided to grow. Because the circumstances are never going to be perfect. Kateri grew right where she found herself, exactly where she was. And then Kateri recognized that the rocks and the thorns weren't so much something that's out there, outside of us, but rather something that is in here, in our hearts. So, to grow as a disciple, you and me, we have to be willing to challenge ourselves, to get uncomfortable, to risk being thought less of in the eyes of others. So the questions this week are this: what rocks and thorns are in your heart? How are these rocks and thorns keeping you from taking the next step on your discipleship path? And finally, what would it look like if your heart was the rich soil that produced fruit, 100 or 60 or 30-fold?